Jibwa, dozens dead, total chaos. Headlines screamed horror, but behind the carnage, a cold, calculated message. Not just an attack, but bait. A surgical operation to trap one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Is he the next target? Let's find out. The attackers looted nothing, took nothing. They struck hard, filmed the aftermath, then vanished, leaving behind a faceless crisis. Immediately, foreign media ignited. Burkina Faso losing control. Traoré failing. It was provocation. The goal? To corner Traoré, to force a misstep, to isolate him, to suggest the captain wasn't so invincible after all. And it almost worked. Within 48 hours, unusual diplomatic communications, coded briefings. The Jibwa attack opened the door to a soft coup. No bullets, but decisions slipping from Traoré's control. A decades-old tactic. A national figure rises, speaks of sovereignty, pride. He makes deals that don't go through Paris or Washington. He becomes a symbol, and his enemies appear. Sometimes in uniform, sometimes in NGO badges. Sometimes they let chaos speak. The goal? To discredit the symbol. To remove him without martyrdom. Traoré became that symbol. Jibwa was the first attempt. They want to drag him into a war of attrition, exhaust his resources, force him to seek international aid, or even better, trigger internal fractures that remove him without a single foreign hand getting dirty. Today, he's surrounded by shadows. Surveillance drones. Jam communications at key borders. International aid with hidden clauses. The battle isn't on the front lines anymore. It's revolving around the president's chair. The question is, does Traoré see the trap? Can he stay one step ahead? Because Jibwa wasn't an isolated strike. It was the kickoff in a much longer game. No foreign army. No declared hostility. And yet, Ibrahim Traoré is surrounded. This is how modern coups begin. Not with tanks, but with tension. Not with missiles, but with manufactured silence. After Jibwa, the pressure isn't on the battlefield anymore. It's closing in on Traoré himself. It's no longer happening in the field. It's starting in the boardrooms of Western finance. Since the attack, international investors have quietly withdrawn from infrastructure projects. Development banks have reevaluated their risk profiles. Regional insurers have hiked premiums on Burkina Faso sea lanes and trade corridors. On paper, this looks like prudent financial behavior. In reality, it's economic pressure disguised as caution. The trap is elegant. Traoré, having refused a bow to the IMF and other debt lords, is now facing a liquidity freeze with no sanctions declared. Gold trade flows are slowing. Mining audits are stalled. Foreign subcontractors are fleeing. And it's all designed to say one thing. Without us, you cannot function. This siege isn't just economic. It's diplomatic. High-level Western diplomats have gone silent. Embassies have scaled back engagement. No condolence messages. No offers of support. Just a carefully coordinated absence that speaks volumes. Behind the scenes, however, pressure is mounting. Envoys to ECOWAS states are reportedly urging neighboring leaders to distance themselves from Burkina Faso, portraying Traoré as reckless, unstable, and dangerous to regional peace. The goal? Containment, political quarantine. If they can't remove him, they'll make him a pariah. And in parallel, a more insidious front is opening. The narrative war. After Jibwa, the headlines were quick and brutal. Traoré losing control, security failing in Burkina Faso. But pay attention. Almost none of the articles quoted sources from Burkina Faso. Almost all relied on external observers, anonymous analysts, or pre-packaged briefings passed through familiar Western channels. This isn't just biased reporting. It's a controlled demolition of legitimacy. If the world believes Traoré is losing, then allies will hesitate, investment will freeze, and local confidence will crack. This is the hope. To erode his support without ever directly confronting him. What makes this siege truly dangerous is how internal actors are beginning to bend under this pressure. Bureaucrats who once pledged loyalty now remain silent in meetings. Regional governors are starting to delay instructions. Some military officers, worried about foreign blacklists, are beginning to think about self-preservation over national defense. This is how isolation becomes suffocation. This is how a revolution dies without a single bomb being dropped. Yet Traoré stands. And this may be what frustrates them most. Because the Jibwa trap didn't catch him. The financial pressure didn't break him. The media storm didn't shake him. But make no mistake, they are still tightening the noose. Quietly, constantly, patiently. As financial news tightens and diplomacy chills, another arm of this war is quietly slipping beneath the surface. The recycling of violence as a controlled political tool. The affiliated insurgents who stormed Jibwa were not rogue agents acting on a religious crusade. That's the cover story. In reality, they were part of a carefully timed performance, triggered not to conquer, but to destabilize with surgical precision. These are not independent actors. They are hired weapons by invisible clients. Here's how the game works. These groups don't control territory for long. They don't build governance. They don't declare policy. What they repeatedly do is strike critical points in the state's nervous system. A base here, a road there, a grain reserve, a hydroelectric dam. Always just enough to disrupt, to provoke, to expose. Then they vanish. This is an ideology, its function. Insurgents like these don't need to understand geopolitics. They don't need a seat at the table. Their purpose is to create the pressure that forces someone else's agenda through the back door. One attack in the north, and suddenly a foreign security proposal reappears. A bomb on a convoy and a delayed foreign mining contract gets renegotiated. Coincidence? Ask any analyst who has seen this play out in Libya, Mali, or Sudan. First come the raids, then the rumors, then the vultures. But this time, the script is being fought. And that's what makes Burkina Faso a threat. Traoré isn't asking for help from the usual suspects. He's not calling on the international community to mediate. He's not allowing the same government troops that finance news to suddenly help with stability. And that breaks the cycle, which is why they've turned up the volume on the insurgents like a dial. More attacks, more whispers, more headlines. But who's turning that dial? Look at the weapons flow. None of these affiliated groups manufacture weapons. They don't run logistics chains. They don't fund their own communication networks or distribute propaganda in 5 languages. Someone is supplying this. Someone with access, infrastructure, and interests. And it's not a bearded commander in the bush. It's men in suits, corporate intermediaries, foreign managers, retired intelligence operatives working under plausible deniability. They don't launch missiles. They authorize shipments. They don't drop bombs, but approve payment schedules for cooperative informants and tribal security partners. The chaos is made to look local, but the fingerprints, they are foreign, and the goal isn't total collapse. It's managed disruption. Just enough violence to weaken Burkina Faso state machinery. Just enough fear to drain public trust. Just enough dread to make Traoré look overwhelmed, but never enough to trigger a full revolution, because a total collapse would mean losing control, and control is what they want to keep. So these affiliated insurgents, these so-called enemies of the West, often appear just in time to serve Western interests. It's not an accident. It's a tactic. Traoré knows it. His inner circle knows it. The people are beginning to suspect it. But suspicion isn't enough anymore. Not when proxy war masquerades as internal unrest. Because when a nation bleeds, but the wounds always open at the most opportune moments for its enemies, you're not looking at an accident. You're looking at an operation. And in Burkina Faso, that operation has a name. Regime recalibration. The question is, who's next on the list? Is it Traoré? When surrounded, most leaders retreat or freeze. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré is doing something unexpected. He's not just building barricades or bunkers. He's building a whole new model of state forged under pressure, designed to survive in the absence of international approval and destined to inspire others on the continent. As affiliated insurgents strike the north and financiers encircle the economy, Traoré is laying the groundwork for a parallel Burkina Faso, deliberately disconnected from the systems that made it vulnerable in the first place. And he's doing it silently. First, domestic production is militarized, not for war, but for sovereignty. In recent months, Burkina Faso has begun routing emergency funds into local food processing, small-scale energy grids, and rural defense networks that operate outside formal bureaucracies. These aren't press releases. These are silent revolutions. The message is clear. If they cut us off, we'll grow through the cracks. Second, Traoré is building new economic corridors that bypass old choke points. Partnering with Mali and Niger, trade routes are being rerouted inland, away from Western-monitored ports. A new deal with Algeria is reportedly in the works to open a land and supply route north to the Mediterranean through Sahelian terrain. A logistical nightmare, but one worth solving. This is more than logistics. It's a symbolic rejection of inherited geography from maps drawn to ensure dependence on colonial railways and coastlines. Third, Burkina Faso is digitizing resistance, in a move many have underestimated. Traoré has quietly tasked local developers to begin work on secure, off-grid communication platforms, a decentralized system that could keep civilian coordination intact even if foreign-backed actors disrupt national networks. Why does this matter? Because narrative control has always been the first step in overthrow. Whoever speaks last speaks loudest. Traoré doesn't want to be silenced, and he's preparing for when information becomes a battlefield. Fourth, and perhaps most strategically, Traoré is turning ideology into institutional memory. In schools, youth councils, civilian training programs, and even military armies, a new doctrine is being written that Burkina Faso must never again be led by outside interests. This isn't empty nationalism. It's a survival mechanism, because history has shown that any revolution not founded on doctrine becomes vulnerable to infiltration, and Traoré seems to know that ideas survive bullets. He is now doing what leaders like Sankara died before finishing, building institutions that do not need Western validation to function. Yet all of this is being done under siege. While affiliated insurgents strike supply lines, while investments dry up, while foreign agents probe his inner circle. This isn't a response. It's a counteroffensive, not with force, but with foresight, because Traoré seems to understand a brutal truth. Burkina Faso may not win by outgunning its enemies, but can win by outlasting their attention span. If empire relies on shock and disruption, then Traoré is betting on slow permanence. The idea that while they panic for headlines, he builds for history. So as the world waits for another explosion, the Real story might be this. Amidst a siege, a new nation is quietly being born. Ibrahim Traoré survived the Jibwa ambush. He bypassed isolation. He began quietly building a new Burkina Faso while under siege. But survival is not the finish line. It is the first test. Because what comes next will not be a skirmish on the battlefield or a media campaign. It will be something far more dangerous. The moment his system, his people, begin to ask the question every revolution fears. How long can we hold out? Traoré's biggest challenge isn't avoiding the next attack. It's proving his vision can deliver faster than fear can spread. He needs to move from resistance to collapse to producing results. Because insurgents can terrify a region, but only internal disillusionment can break a country. This is the moment when outside forces will redouble their efforts, not with brute force, but with temptation. Offers of quiet deals, technical assistance, humanitarian corridors are attached with conditional clauses, all of it wrapped in urgency for the people, all of it with the goal of drawing the system into dependency, not through violence, but through fatigue. And if the people lose patience, if rice prices skyrocket, if wages stagnate, or if roads remain broken for 1 month too long, then the same voices now cheering sovereignty might begin to ask, was this worth it? This is where most revolutions fail. Not on the battlefield, but in the waiting room. So Traoré's mission must be threefold. First, consolidate loyalty before convenience takes over. This means he needs to root out the undecided and the subtle saboteurs in his administration, those who nod in meetings but quietly make calls to embassies after dark. He cannot afford to be surrounded by people playing both sides. Not now. Second, decentralize the pressure. His survival cannot rest entirely on Ouagadougou's shoulders. Regional governors, village chiefs, youth brigades, they must be brought into the project not just as supporters, but as builders. Let every province feel they own a piece of the national recovery. If they feel it's Traoré's plan alone, they'll watch it fall. If they feel it's theirs, they'll defend it like family. Third, And most importantly, Traoré must speak the truth before someone else tells a louder lie. He cannot sugarcoat what's coming. The nation is under attack, not just by insurgents with guns, but by contractors, by banks, by smiles and suits. The people must understand this is not a normal moment. This is a front line disguised as politics, a war disguised as aid. If he names the enemy, if he explains the stakes, if he shows what's being built and why it matters, he keeps the fire lit. But if he stays silent too long, if he lets a narrative drift, if doubt grows in the silence, then Djibo won't be the beginning. It will be the plan repeated, refined, and redirected straight to his heart. Because his enemies have one last card: patience. They've seen Africa rise before. They've seen sparks of sovereignty ignite, only to flicker out when the world looks away. Their hope is simple: that Traoré runs out of momentum before they run out of time. So the burden is no longer just on him, but on everyone watching. For if he falls, it won't be in the headlines, it will be in the silence.